revival of lost legacy. So I'll now invite Mr. Zainul Abidin Kaji for his presentation.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you and good morning. Jazakallah to the organizers for including this important topic on the agenda. I say it's important because I believe that it is one of our lost legacies, and I think it needs a revival. But what I'd like to do is, before I continue, I'd like to ask you, I'd like to pose a question to you, and I'd like to get some responses from you. I'd like to know, for example, in Mauritius, what are your major challenges that you feel, social challenges, or any other challenge that you feel that is applicable here in Mauritius? It could be anything. It could be the environment. It could be your family. It could be society. But let's get some feedback from you. Are there too many divorces? Too many young marriages?
Poverty alleviation?
Poverty alleviation, yes.
Elimination of riba.
Okay. And I want to move away a little bit from the banking side of things. I'm focusing more on social challenges and so forth. Socio-economic, political could be as well.
Empowering the population.
Empowering population. Okay, any others? Demographic?
Yes, we are 17%. Maybe, I don't know, it's 25 or 50 years. Demographic.
You think the population, the Muslim population, is reducing or increasing?
Maybe it's reducing, I think.
So you feel that long term,
yes,
that's a bit of a challenge, that you feel it should be increasing?
Moral values are eroding.
Okay.
There is erosion of moral values and principles, starting from the higher level, that is, from those who in power, who are sending the wrong signal to the population.
Okay.
Corruption and so on.
Okay. Yes, brother. Self-sufficiency, okay, very important.
To bridge a gap between rich people and poor people, and also social solidarity.
Okay. Social gap, socio-economic gap, and bridging. Sorry, you said. The second one was. The one was, you said something about the
poor people and rich people.
Yes.
The gap,
Okay.
bridge a gap between these two,
Okay.
and other social solidarity.
Okay. Tell me something. How about education? I mean, are you satisfied that the Muslim community is sufficiently educated and it serves for the long term? You've got sufficient schools, you've got sufficient numbers of engineers, you've got sufficient numbers of politicians and strategists and MBAs and people who can really take charge of the economy and so forth. Do you have enough of those people? You have? So it's not a challenge. Education is not a challenge to you.
Employment is a challenge.
Employment. You have, for example, what's your research output? How much are Muslims actually putting out research into the community and being of benefit to the whole of the community out here?
If I might add one factor which englobles all these factors, I would say that the political deciders in Mauritius, they lack this coordination. See? For example, if we take the road system here in Mauritius, we take the road system in Iban. Okay? So for me personally, the system should have, from the start, they should have thought to implement the parking. Okay? So it's just after a few years that they realize, oh, we need a parking. Then they're going to do the parking. So for everything, it goes to the education, environment, self-efficacy, in all fields like that. And this is the main problem in Mauritius.
What about Dawah? What about the community out there? What about religious differences within the community? Okay, anyway, what I'm saying is that you do have many challenges out there. Okay, now why I'm starting with this here is to show you that, number one, broadly speaking, we do have lots of challenges. Number two is that you may have, I mean, this is another question that I could ask you, is that if you were the person who had a bit of wealth and you were to do something for your community, what is it that you would do?
I think the creation of the National Baitul Mal.
National Baitul Mal, that's what you would like to do. Okay, anybody else?
Empower the community.
Empowering communities, okay, anybody else?
I would invest in education.
Invest in education, okay. One last one from the sisters, come on. Maybe some kind of facility for women's development? Yeah?
Create a think tank for the community.
Think tank for the community, okay. Now, just a question. How is all this going to be funded? There's lots of things that we need to do. How is it all going to be funded? Okay, so that's the critical issue that I think we want to kind of address that. What I want to do is focus a little bit on the whole notion of waqf. And just going back to the Prophet ﷺ and seeing that he has come now onto the scene in Arabia, where you know that there's been a history of jahiliyyah and ignorance and divisions and lots of social problems. And he comes there with a message of change and transformation. Okay? Now, with the change and transformation, he can't just promulgate any one or two rules and regulations. He's got to prepare lots of institutions. He's got to create infrastructure and so forth to be able to face the challenges that he had been facing at the time. So, in view of the fact that he was a visionary, he had to implement various things. For example, the Baitul Mal was established. For example, the Waqf institution was established, and various other institutions. Okay. Then, of course, there's always been sort of concern about the present and the future, and that's why we too have similar sort of challenges, and all the time we'll be having this kind of consideration. Now, just to get to the subject of waqf, essentially, a very literal meaning of it means to stop. Okay, and this you can see like on several of the in Arabia, you'll find the stop signs saying waqf, and you see also at when you go for Hajj, many of you've got this wukuf Arafat. So it's about standing and standing still. Okay. Now, in terms of the Sharia, it actually means that you've got to stop the ownership of your wealth. Okay. You've got to stop the ownership of your wealth, and you've got to transfer that ownership to the ownership of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, for example, just like typically the masjid, people contribute towards the building of the mosque, you no longer own that money. It now belongs to the community, it belongs to Allah. The mosque belongs to Allah. But now, that can be done in the transfer, or the transfer of the ownership can be done with your money. It could be done with any other asset, movable or immovable. Okay? It has to be permanent. So once you give it, it's gone. You can't take it back. It's a gift to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what you do is you dedicate the fruit of it, or the usufruct, either to your family or to charity. Okay, so for example, if we have 1,000 rands or 1,000 rupees, you invest it, let's say it's made into a waqf. The waqf earns, say, 100 rupees out of it. We can only spend the 100 rupees. We cannot spend the 1,000 rupees. That 1,000 rupees has to remain intact capital all the time. It cannot be sold, it cannot be inherited, it cannot be gifted away. It belongs to Allah, it's period, okay? It has to be done for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is one of the primary motivations and primary intentions. Now there's several hows and how to establish a waqf and regulations and so forth around it. Of course, it's a institution that started right very early in the history of Islam. You know, there's tons and tons of books and fiqh literature on the subject. I'm not going to go into it. I just want to give you some basic idea so that you just get a basic understanding of it. And of course, it can be dealt with in depth as we go along. So I think this has been covered as well, that Islam is a comprehensive way of life. It incorporates lots of other institutions, legal, political, economic, and so forth, social institutions. And this is, waqf is only part of this whole infrastructure that is being sort of developed within the community. And I mentioned briefly the nature of the Islamic economy, that it's about caring and sharing. It's not about greed, and it's not about maximization of profits, and it's not a consumerist society. It's a society of development and growth and so forth. So, you know, it's what in South Africa there's an equivalent term called Ubuntu, which means that it's about communities that grow together, share together, and develop together. So the issue about solidarity comes here. You know, as we develop this institution, for example, if I have to ask you, does the community of Mauritius have one capital fund that belongs to the community? And invariably, in many communities, the answer is no. It's because this legacy is lost. At one stage, yes, we did have it. The other very important, we've heard of the maqasid of the Sharia. Now, I think that it's very important that we understand that any Islamic development or any institution needs to actually fit into these 5 major maqasid or higher objectives of the Sharia. And that is the protection of the deen, the protection of the self, the protection of intellect, the protection of your progeny, the protection of wealth. Actually, creation and protection, promotion and protection. So the maqasid of the Sharia are very basic to this whole idea. Then we talk about empowerment, and one of the challenges that we talked about was empowerment here as well. And as mentioned, that you cannot be empowered unless you own, control, and manage. Okay, 3 very important and basic ideas that it's no sense you actually, you know, it's about like the conventional banks. The community here deposits monies into a conventional bank. The conventional bank takes that money and develops areas around the seaside and so forth without actually reinvesting in the people that have actually deposited their money there in the first place. So, and the reason for that is because you don't own, you don't control, you don't manage the institution. So very important that if we are to be empowered, then we need to have control and management of our resources. Infaq and bir, there are more verses in the Quran about infaq than about salah and hajj and all the other 5 pillars of Islam put together. وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالُهُمْ. Several verses